Hi there, welcome back. Hopefully you enjoyed our last bit about fossils and where you might find fossils and the early evolutionary relationships of cephalopods. Now we're going to look at the extant cephalopods, the coleoid cephalopods, and all the weird and wonderful cephalopods in between. So again, sit back and hopefully this will be of interest to you cephalopod nerds. You may have seen a lot in the news in the last few years about this idea that cephalopods are from another planet or that they were seeded here somehow by an asteroid a long time ago. And we actually use the term cephalopod to define an entire class of organisms. And if you remember from your biology, we actually rank organisms in levels of complexity in a hierarchical sense, and class is quite high up. And if you're comparing cephalopods with another class, we might compare them with mammals. So when we talk about cephalopods, it's an equivalent term to the term mammals, but clearly naming these squishy, intelligent things rather than these hairy, squishy, intelligent things. So the paper that started all this off is actually from 2018, and it's published in the Progress in Biophysics and Molecular Biology, which actually ironically is open access given how much rubbish is in it. It's actually free for the public to look at, which is interesting. And the title is called The Cause of the Cambrian Explosion, Terrestrial or Cosmic. Now, if you're not familiar, the Cambrian explosion did or did not happen around 530 million years ago. In the fossil record, we do see an abundant radiation of new life forms. And the word Cambrian explosion comes from the period it came from and this idea that animals exploded into lots of novel forms. Now we now think that it's probably not quite the explosion, but indeed most of today's phyla, which is a very high order of taxonomy, did appear in a very or relatively short period of time, probably over 100, 150 million years. And the paper is actually really long, it's 21 pages long, and it deals with a lot more than just cephalopods. It actually invokes the idea that RNA or RNA viruses have actually led to an explosion in intelligence, and there's a lot more to the paper. And I'll show you the subsequent issues with it right now. This is the offending part of this large paper, and again, it's only a small part, but it is absolutely bonkers. Evidence of the role of extraterrestrial viruses in affecting terrestrial evolution has recently been plausibly implied in gene and transcriptome sequence of cephalopods. No citation. I have no idea where they get this from. And then they suggest that the octopus genome shows a staggering level of complexity, 33,000 protein coding genes, but then again, many organisms have far more coding genes than Homo sapiens do, which of course is us. Then they say that the cephalopods have an evolutionary history that stretches back over 500 million years, true, and that cephalopod phylogenetics is highly inconsistent and confusing, a number of citations. Well, actually, the same can be said to be true for nearly every large lineage in the fossil record. It's very difficult to reconcile evolutionary relationships when you're using a small number of fossils or a small number of morphological traits. So it's really no surprise at all that the evolutionary relationships of the cephalopods is confusing. You would expect that. They go on to suggest that somehow these transformative genes that led from an ancestral nautilus to the common cuttlefish, etc., and I quote, are not easily to be found in any pre-existing life form. It is plausible then to suggest that they seem to be borrowed from a far distant future in terms of terrestrial evolution, or more realistically, from the cosmos at large, which is just absolutely bonkers. And we see on many cephalopod fan pages like Octonation or the Cephalopod Appreciation Society where the public are still making these analogies with them being alien. And it's actually quite sad, I think, because cephalopods are fantastic in their own rights, and we don't need to invoke this idea that they're aliens for them to be as amazing as they actually are. And we know they've been around for 500 million years. The fossil record is really good. So the earliest fossils of cephalopods turn up around 530 million years ago during the Cambrian period. And again, to put it into context and to compare it with mammals, mammals arrived on the scene around 230 million years ago. So cephalopods have been around for over twice as long as mammals have. And on your screen now, there's a really lovely graphic of what we think is the evolution of cephalopods. Now, this was created by Dana Staff in a book that she wrote, and it's a really simplistic diagram explaining really the proposed evolutionary relationships. Now, there is a lot of uncertainty, as I've noted already, but that's very normal for such an ancient lineage, especially those that don't preserve very well, like the more recent coleoid cephalopods like the octopuses and cuttlefish, etc. And if you look at this evolutionary tree, you can see some recognizable species right away. You'll see the nautilus on the right hand side is actually extremely ancient, evolved well over 400 million years ago, and remains more or less very, very similar today. On the left-hand side of this phylogenetic tree, as we might call it, you start to see things called the ammonoids. Now, the ammonoids are the group name for the ammonites, and you'll see that the ammonites are well represented and survive all the way into the Cretaceous period. Now, unfortunately, during the Cretaceous period, we know that a major mass extinction happened. We lost the dinosaurs, or the non-avian dinosaurs, around that time. And sadly, the ammonites didn't make it past the KT extinction. So because of the hard parts that these animals possessed, we find a lot of evidence of them, and we understand what their shells look like in a lot of detail. But what did the whole organism look like? Are we able to ascertain this? Are we able to guess somehow? Well, the more discoveries we make, the more likely soft parts can be discovered. Now, we're missing soft parts for nearly all of these extant cephalopods, but certain parts of the shell allow us to infer what might attach there. And this is a wonderful example where art is meeting science, and we're finding some wonderful of what they're called paleo artists, which take very seriously the scientific evidence that we have from the paleontological record, and then do their best ability to create these organisms as if they'd look like they were alive today. Now, of course, it is speculative, it's not perfect, and the animals may look completely different, but it's a really lovely window into what they possibly look like in the wild. So we've looked a little bit about the extinct cephalopods, what remains today. Well, there's at least 800 extant cephalopods. They occupy all marine habits. We don't find any in fresh water at all. And I've read in a couple of places that we may be going through what's called the age of the cephalopods. And by that, paleontologists have argued that there's more extant cephalopod species now than there have been extinct cephalopod species at various times. And it's quite a difficult thing to say this because the fossil record is often incomplete, it doesn't preserve soft parts. So I'm not sure how we would know for sure if this is indeed the age of the cephalopods. Because of anthropogenic causes, we may be creating the age of the cephalopods through our actions. And we know a little bit about the evolutionary relationships of the extinct taxa because it's much easier to find out these relationships using modern molecular techniques, using genes and more recently genomes, entire genomes, to understand relationships. And we have a good idea about the present relationship. And you'll see at the very top of this evolutionary tree the extinct taxa, including the cuttlefish, the ram's horn squid, vampire squid, which has to be the most ridiculously misnamed animal ever. It's neither a vampire nor a squid. Also things like the octopuses, and of course the nautilus remains, although it is very much an outgroup compared to the remaining cephalopods in our seas. And if anyone is interested in the evolution of cephalopods and the ongoing research that goes on, there's a wonderful Facebook page called Cephalopods Present and Past Network, and the latest discoveries are often shown on this, and it's a good place to get papers as well. So what does the future hold for cephalopods? What can we expect from our influence, our interference, and also the changing climate? Well, it's looking pretty good actually. We tend to remove cephalopod predators and eat them ourselves, which leaves them free to carry on with their lives without too much threat. And a lovely review paper called The Potential Impacts of Climate Change on Inshore Squid actually suggests that squid, at least, can be considered weeds of the sea, in that they'll take over rapidly if a gap appears in the environment or the ecosystem. But some papers have gone even further than that, actually projects into 100 years' time what we might find in cephalopods. And the wonderful paper by Xavier et al. In 2016 used climatic data, undersea mapping, and numerous other techniques to speculate whether or not cuttlefish will reach the Americas. Now, if you weren't aware already, cuttlefish actually don't exist in the Americas. We don't find them in South America, Central or North America. But if temperatures continue to warm, the paper suggests that there is a route from northern England all the way through across the Arctic Ocean to the Americas. Now, we don't know for sure if that's going to happen, but it's a nice idea of applying climatic science and undersea mapping and the natural migratory behaviour of a species and seeing where it might go in the future.
Well, that's it for this week's show. I hope you enjoyed it and learned a little bit about the evolution and the fossil record of cephalopods. Next week we'll be talking about, actually I don't know yet,